let's get into the specifics of this then. And it's no criticism of Jeremy. I talked to him, he's a great guy. But at the same time, we had, like I say, for me, it just came out of nowhere. And it might have been worked on for 2 years. Maybe I've missed some of the discussions. But for me, Taproot was out there in the open, being openly discussed by everybody I know for a good 2-3 years. I think I first spoke to Andrew Polster about it at MIT about 3 years ago. First, I became aware of CTV was a few weeks ago, and people were talking about activation. So that was an immediate red flag to me, because I was thinking, well, I'm pretty sure I should have heard about this. So I was nervous about that. Before we get into that, though, should we explain what covenants are? And why there's some contention around it?
Yeah. So a covenant is, I guess it's like a word borrowed from legal terminology. So if you've ever engaged in a property transaction, real estate, there'll be some clauses on your house or your apartment that says, you've got to maintain this boundary wall with the neighbor or something like that. And it's a covenant because when you sell it, you've got to maintain that clause. You can't decide you don't like it and remove it. It's not within your authority to remove this rule. And so that applies to these scripts, that the idea is that you can create a transaction, you opt into it as a receiver that has a restriction on how you can spend it. And that's actually turns out to be useful for certain programmability. I think the most concretely useful example people give is a time lock vault. If you try to do cold storage, it's quite interesting. It would mean that you could store some Bitcoins in cold storage. When you want to take them out, you do a devaulting process. And then, let's say for a week, the transaction could be canceled and go back into the vault. And if it's not canceled within a week, then you can spend it, wherever you were trying to spend it. And that gives you some safety because, you could give the cancel button to your friends, extended family, colleagues, that kind of thing. And if they see a lot of coins moving and they can't reach you, they could get suspicious and cancel it. So it has that kind of, that's the basic idea for the vaults. And it's possible to build a version of that in today's Bitcoin scripts by deleting private keys, but it's a little, it's not the most elegant way to do it, but it would work. Nobody has actually implemented that. And of course, it's a flexible mechanism, so people could build other things with it. Potentially UTXO sharing, which is the kind of scaling idea. But I think people also lose track of the fact that a lot of the things that are possible with Bitcoin script are not implemented and made available in wallets in a usable form. So there's lots of innovation that could happen today using existing script. And so that kind of, ease of use, standardization of formats, understandable and easy to use availability in wallets is lagging often by years, right? So, even once we get Taproot, it'll be a while, as you see before, wallets support it. That was the same with SegWit. It's over 50% now, but it took some years. And I'm sure it would be the case for covenants too, right? Or time-like vaults.
Is there any validity to the argument against covenants that they affect Bitcoin's fungibility?
Well, there are two versions of covenants broadly, and one is recursive. So
is this what Andreas was talking about?
Yeah, I think so. So the original sort of covenants for Bitcoin proposal was by Greg Maxwell on the Bitcoin talk list, I think in 2013, something like SCIP, which is a technical term, a hilariously bad idea. And so he was thinking about the things that could go wrong. But I think since that time, people have started to think more about it, muse on the idea, mull it over, and think that, certainly restricted covenants are probably safe, and even recursive covenants are reasonably safe because you opt in and so forth. And, so like at least three arguments about why that might be okay that have been developed since then. One is you have to opt in as the recipient. Now, that can be a slippery slope because, if somebody in authority like a bank says opt in or don't have business with us, how much choice do you really have, right? So that's one argument. Another one is that the fact that Bitcoin doesn't have covenant capability today, because it's a programming language, you can often build a huge permutation of things using the building blocks, right? So Russell O'Connor made the argument that it's almost an accident that Bitcoin doesn't have governance today. It was because some of the opcodes were removed because they had bugs in the very early days. If CAT was there and a few other features had been implemented slightly different, we would have had them by side effect.
Right.
So it's as the functionality of Bitcoin script gets more general over time, it's probably going to cross that boundary, possibly even by accident. And there might be a small possibility that it's possible today, even if somebody really put a lot of effort into finding some clever tricks to just about make it work. So that's to say, well, if it's almost possible, its general implication of programmability, maybe it's not such a clear, important line. And I think, the last thing is just that it's just programmability. So, you don't have to use it. It's opt-in. And that you can, the sort of KYC Bitcoin risk that people worry about, they're basically saying that what if, a set of banks agreed to a standard where there had to be KYC on a Bitcoin or you couldn't transfer it. Now, it turns out you can implement that with multi-sigs, and people have proposed that before.
Okay.
So from that point of view, again, you'd have to opt in. So it has largely the same characteristics. And those are generally called sort of informally online covenants, which is there's a multi-sig, one key is held by an authority and it imposes some policy. So they're kind of online covenant because that policy can be recursive if they choose.
And what about whitelists and blacklists? Is that possible? Is that a valid concern?
I think they mean basically the same thing.
Is it basically? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you yourself, Adam, obviously I back you, don't mean no pun intended, but are you okay with the idea of covenants?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Whether it starts with simple or goes straight to a more generic version is a topic being discussed at the moment, and there are technical people on either side of that. So one argument for starting simple is that, Bitcoin can gain some experience from that, and that can inform the generic. But the other point is that, Bitcoin doesn't have the rate of introduction of new opcodes is not very rapid. So if you're going to take the time and expense to review and get consensus on a covenant feature, you might as well do it properly once. That's the counter argument. I think a lot of technical people are more on that line of argument. Rusty Russell has proposed one, which is sort of extensible within itself, so it can start simple and have kind of feature extensions over time. So that's another kind of hybrid approach.
Okay, I'll come back to that. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about is that, and again, I don't understand the detail of this, but some of the arguments regarding CTV was that it would introduce the ability to shitcoin with Bitcoin. What was this about?
I did not pick that one up.
You didn't pick that one up?
No,
that came up quite a bit. It was starting to give more Ethereum type functionality with the scripting. Smart contract stuff.
Oh, I guess if you can make more complicated scripts, maybe some automated trading kind of functionality becomes possible.
Right. So would you say it's a fair way to explain this where we are, is that covenants, there is a broad consensus that these might be okay. We should be careful. There is a proposal from Jeremy that's been fairly well developed that he feels is ready to go, that doesn't have strong consensus either amongst core devs, general devs, the community. There are competing proposals that those who aren't with Jeremy think need considering as well. And Jeremy's idea isn't dead, it's just not at that point where it's reached consensus. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that's approximately the situation.
His proposal isn't dead.
No, I mean, and the assuming that consensus is reached on something, it may be none of them. It may be a synthesis of the best ideas from all of them, for example, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there's a sort of experience and history to it. So, for example, many people have gone through this process where they proposed a BIP and it's informed something else. So Christian Decker, who's one of the Lightning authors, and actually the co-author of APO, which is another opcode that's in flight at the moment, sort of competing or ideally should come before governance because it's been in the queue for longer and helps Lightning. So before SegWit, Christian was working with Peter Wool on normalized transaction ID. So it was it was an attempt to fix the problem that SegWit fixes. And it turned out SegWit was a better way to do it, so that BIP got left in history, right? And so, that's an experience you have, right? You work on something, it reaches its limits, and somebody finds a better way to do it. Now, the fact that you worked on it, it wasn't lost effort, because the realization that there were limitations there informed the new design, or maybe it borrowed some of the design ideas.